So I've given this talk a few times before. Sometimes it's called Safeguarding Pagan Voices, and sometimes it's called Defending Pagan Rights in a Changing World. Either way, it's the same talk, and I think it's a really important one. So I'm happy to keep giving it wherever people might be listening. So thank you very so much for being here. I'd like to begin by asking you to take a moment, just a breath or two, to feel into the flame that burns within you. That quiet strength, that spark of magic, that connection to the earth, the ancestors, and the mysteries that flow through the world around us. That flame is what we're here to talk about today, not in a poetic or mystical sense, but in the very real grounded way that that flame needs to be protected, nurtured, and kept alive in a world that doesn't always understand it and sometimes actively seeks to snuff it out. So let me take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Kerr, and I've walked a pagan path for many, many years, over 30 years now. I'm part of the Pagan Federation. It's an organisation that's been central to the protection, education and celebration of pagan traditions here in the UK for more than half a century. Like many of you, I've felt the joy of deep spiritual connection, but I've also seen firsthand the suspicion, the misunderstanding, and the discrimination that can come when you live your truth openly as pagan. And that's why I'm here today, not just as a speaker, but as someone who cares very deeply about the safety, the dignity, and the future of our communities. The Pagan Federation was founded in 1971, and it was originally as a way of connecting like-minded people and offering a voice to pagans in a world where we were often invisible or misrepresented. Over the years, its mission has grown to include public education, interfaith representation, chaplaincy, and support for pagans from all walks of life. We work with the government, with prison and hospital services, with the media, and with other faith groups to ensure that pagan voices are heard, respected, and protected. And while progress has been made on all of these things, the work is far from over. We are currently living in very challenging times. The world feels uncertain and polarized, and at times unwelcoming for those who walk a pagan path. And while it's true that we've made great strides over the years, from greater public awareness to some legal protections, there are still very real threats to the rights, safety, and dignity of pagans across the UK and beyond. Some of these are external. They come from harmful media narratives, from discrimination in institutions, and of course, the rise of authoritarian or religious extremism. And some come from within our own communities, and they're issues that we must face with honesty and courage. This talk isn't meant to scare or discourage us, quite the opposite. It's a call to awareness, a call to action, and a call to really deep connection. It's about understanding what threatens the freedoms that we often take for granted and exploring how we can come together, both rooted in our diversity and united in our values, to stand strong and to protect the spaces that we hold sacred. Over the next short while, we're going to explore a range of threats to pagan rights, from historical injustice to modern day challenges. We'll look at the damaging legacy of the satanic ritual abuse panic, the ways that pagans are still misrepresented or marginalised, and the real life consequences that this can have. We'll also touch on what it means to defend our communities in healthy, practical, and powerful ways that are rooted in education, compassion, resilience, and joy. Because defending our rights isn't just about legal protections or fighting battles in courtrooms, it's also about visibility, about reclaiming the narrative, about living openly, authentically, and without shame. It's about making space for every kind of pagan to feel safe and seen, no matter their path, their background, or their beliefs. It's about knowing that we're not alone and that we're not powerless. We carry wisdom that is ancient and relevant. We carry traditions that honour the earth, the cycles of nature, and the spark of the divine in all things. And today, we carry the responsibility to protect those traditions, not just for ourselves, but for those who will walk this path after us. So let's dive in, shall we? To understand the threats that we face today, we need to look back, to acknowledge the history of how paganism has been treated, how it's been misunderstood and targeted, often unfairly, by dominant cultural forces. Pagans are no strangers to prejudice. Long before pagan movements emerged in the 20th century, the very idea of folk traditions, goddess worship, nature reverence, and alternative forms of spirituality had already been demonized by centuries of doctrine. Words like witch, heathen, and pagan were twisted into slurs, terms used to other and oppress. The burning times, those tragic centuries of witch trials and inquisitions across Europe and colonial lands, cast a long shadow. And while modern paganism doesn't claim unbroken lineage from those accused in historical witch trials, the cultural memory of that violence lives on in the collective psyche. It reminds us how easily fear and suspicion can become law, and how dangerous it can be when religious or moral panic is given a free rein. Fast forward to the 1980s and 1990s, and we see one of the most harmful modern examples of this pattern, the satanic ritual abuse panic. The SRA myth began in North America, but it soon spread to the UK and other parts of the world. It was a moral panic driven by a toxic mix of sensationalist media, flawed psychological practices, and religious fundamentalism. Claims emerged that underground networks of Satanists were ritually abusing children, often based on nothing more than suggestion, hypnosis, or coerced testimony. And despite the complete lack of evidence, lives were destroyed. Children were separated from families, innocent people were imprisoned, and crucially, pagans were caught in the crossfire. At a time when paganism was still largely misunderstood and often lumped in with occultism, witchcraft, or devil worship by the uninformed, pagans became a very easy scapegoat. People who honoured nature, celebrated the cycles of life, or simply wore pentacles found themselves targeted with suspicion, hatred, and outright discrimination. This is where the Pagan Federation stepped in with courage and clarity. Members of the PF worked hard, both behind the scenes and publicly, to challenge that misinformation, to support those affected, and to speak truth to power. We engaged with social workers, with therapists and journalists, and of course, members of parliament to explain what paganism is, and crucially, what it is not. The PF helped to publish educational materials, offered expert advice to government departments, and formed part of interfaith discussions that helped to steer public understanding away from fear. It's thanks in part to this work that the tide eventually turned, and the SRA panic is now widely recognised as one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in recent decades. But just because it's behind us doesn't mean it's gone. Today, we live in a world where misinformation spreads faster than ever. Conspiracy theories flourish on social media. Moral panic has returned, just in new guises. And once again, minority faiths, including pagans, are vulnerable to being mischaracterized, and especially in times of social instability. We're seeing renewed accusations that spiritual practices like witchcraft are dangerous or corrupting. Pagan festivals are still denied access to certain venues. Parents face prejudice in custody battles if they're open about their beliefs, and pagan chaplains still struggle for full recognition in some prison and hospital settings. In some interfaith settings, pagans are tolerated rather than welcomed. In others, we're still excluded entirely. Meanwhile, public narratives often default to stereotypes. The sexy, spooky witch trope, or the idea that our spirituality is all theatrics and no depth, or worse, that it's immoral, lawless, or threatening. These assumptions aren't only hurtful, they're harmful. They affect mental health. They create barriers to full participation in public life, and they create an environment where discrimination can quietly thrive unchecked. This is why understanding our history matters, because when we see how these patterns repeat, how prejudice often disguises itself in new clothes, we're better equipped to challenge it when it shows up again. We must remember that the SRA panic wasn't just an anomaly. It was the result of deep-rooted fears, misinformation, and a lack of pagan representation at decision-making tables. And while the PF and others fought hard to correct the record then, we must remain vigilant now. We must also recognise that not all prejudice against pagans comes from outside. Internalised shame, gatekeeping, or elitism within our own communities can add to the harm. When people feel that they must hide their beliefs to be accepted, or when newer pagans are dismissed or mocked by more experienced practitioners, we reinforce the same systems of silence and exclusion that we're trying to fight. So let this section be a reminder. We're part of a long line of people who have stood up in the face of misunderstanding. We've pushed back against injustice with strength and grace, and we must continue to do so, not by retreating, but by rising, not by hiding who we are, but by embodying it proudly, visibly, and compassionately. Now, while we may no longer live in a time of witch trials and state-sponsored persecution, modern pagans still face significant barriers, biases, and threats to our religious rights and freedoms. The world has changed, but prejudice, ignorance, and fear have not disappeared. They've simply evolved. Despite legal protections for religious freedom, paganisms often remain invisible or marginalized within institutions such as education, healthcare, the prison system, and workplaces. In education, pagan children and teenagers may be mocked or bullied for their beliefs. School RE curricula often exclude paganism entirely, focusing instead on the big six religions. While paganism is mentioned, it is often only in the context of ancient history or mythology, erasing the modern lived reality of contemporary pagan paths. Parents who are open about raising their children within a pagan household may face suspicion or social services scrutiny. And while rare, there are still documented cases of custody disputes where paganism is brought into question as though it somehow compromises a child's well-being. In healthcare and social services, pagan beliefs and spiritual needs are rarely considered. Pagan chaplains, though increasingly recognised, still face an uphill struggle for equal access to patients in hospitals or those receiving end-of-life care. Mental health practitioners may not understand pagan frameworks, risking culturally inappropriate therapy or even misdiagnosis. In the prison system, although paganism is a recognised faith with a prison chaplaincy code, many incarcerated pagans report difficulties accessing ritual tools, religious texts, or pastoral care equivalent to other faiths. Chaplains from other traditions may even dismiss pagan beliefs or actively discourage their practice. In workplaces, pagan holy days are not widely recognised, and openly practising pagans may face career-limiting stigma or ridicule. Requests for leave during festivals like Beltane or Samhain are often refused, and wearing religious jewellery such as a pentacle can still provoke negative comments. These are not just inconveniences, they are systemic inequalities that place an emotional, psychological, and spiritual burden on pagan individuals and communities. In recent years, we've seen a global shift towards authoritarianism, nationalism, and religious fundamentalism in some areas, all of which create an environment in which minority faiths can be further marginalised or threatened. In the UK, the rise in culture war rhetoric has seen renewed hostility towards any belief system seen as alternative or unorthodox or anti-traditional. In this climate, paganism is often misrepresented as either dangerously subversive or laughably unserious. Politicians have been known to joke about witches or druids, while some media outlets frame nature-based spiritual practices as odd, performative, or delusional. Meanwhile, religious fundamentalists continue to equate paganism with Satanism or moral decay, perpetuating the same falsehoods that fueled the satanic panic decades ago. While such views may seem fringe, they can influence policy, school board decisions, and the treatment of pagan individuals in communities heavily shaped by conservative Christian values. Freedom of expression and assembly, key rights for any spiritual community, are also under threat. Protest laws, surveillance, and restrictions on public gatherings affect not just political activists, but those of us who gather for ritual, environmental honouring, or seasonal celebration. And across the world, in places like the US, Brazil, and parts of Eastern Europe, pagans, witches, and nature worshippers have been harassed, criminalised, or even violently targeted. The potential for backlash is very real, and especially when economic instability and fear find a scapegoat. The internet has been a double-edged sword for pagans. On the one hand, it has enabled us to connect, learn, and grow our communities in powerful ways, but it has also given rise to new kinds of threat. Misinformation spreads quickly online. Social media platforms amplify sensationalism, and anti-pagan conspiracy theories still surface with alarming regularity. particularly in TikTok and YouTube spheres where younger audiences are active. At the same time, the growing visibility of witchcraft and pagan aesthetics in pop culture has led to commercialization and trivialization. While this might seem benign or even beneficial, it can obscure the deeper spiritual work that we do and lead the public to think that paganism is a trend or a fashion statement rather than a sincere path. More insidiously, pagan creators, authors, and educators, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, face harassment, doxing, and threats for simply being visible. And although strides have been made, pagan representation in interfaith forums, government consultations, and civic dialogue remains limited. The Pagan Federation and other organisations have worked tirelessly to place pagan voices at the table, but we are still vastly underrepresented compared to more established faiths. When decisions are made about faith in education, public life, healthcare, and law, pagan perspectives are rarely consulted unless we fight to be included. This lack of representation leads to policies that don't reflect our needs, or worse, that ignore or harm them. Whether it's funeral rites, hate crime reporting, or spiritual education standards, our voices must be present to shape fair and inclusive systems. And we must also confront bias within interfaith spaces. Pagan delegates are sometimes treated as token representatives or met with subtle or not so subtle hostility from members of dominant religions. What can we do to protect ourselves and each other? Though the challenges facing pagans are significant, we are not powerless. In fact, the heart of paganism, our reverence for the earth, for the cycles of nature and the sacred within and around us, calls us to act with intention, courage, and community spirit. Education is our first line of defense. When people understand what paganism really is, many of the fears and misconceptions begin to dissolve. Start with everyday conversations with friends, family, colleagues, and neighbours. Speak calmly and confidently about your path. Offer clarity when people conflate paganism with negative stereotypes. For those who feel called, step up as public educators. Write articles, blog posts, or social media threads. Host local workshops or speak at schools and community events. Offer to be interviewed or quoted when pagan topics come up in the media. Support and contribute to pagan organisations like the Pagan Federation, which provides resources for teachers, chaplains, and public institutions to better understand and include pagan beliefs and practices. We also need to advocate for inclusion in legal and civic spaces. That means pushing for religious education in schools that includes paganism, equal access in prisons, hospitals, and public ceremonies, recognition of pagan holy days, and protection under hate crime legislation. Wherever possible, submit feedback, respond to consultations, attend local council meetings, and participate in civic life, not just as individuals, but as representatives of a living tradition. We are stronger together. Being part of a local or national pagan community provides support, solidarity, and safety. In times of crisis, your community can help advocate on your behalf, amplify your voice, and hold space for your healing. If there is no group near you, then consider forming one. This could be a simple moon circle or a seasonal celebration group, or even just an online space for connection and sharing. Don't underestimate the power of ritual and gathering. Coming together to honour the seasons, the ancestors, or the gods not only nourishes our spirits, but affirms our presence in the world. And don't forget the importance of allyship between pagan traditions. Whether you are Wiccan, Druid, heathen, Kemetic, animist, or eclectic, we can unite under the broader pagan banner when our rights are under threat. And sometimes spiritual activism means getting involved in the systems that we wish to change. That might mean writing to MPs, SPs, or councillors about pagan rights, supporting legal challenges against discrimination, helping to create guidance for institutions on religious equality, volunteering with organisations like Liberty, Amnesty International, or local equality boards. The Pagan Federation and other bodies have done vital work behind the scenes, meeting with government departments, advising schools and prisons, and representing pagan interests in public forums. But they need support, funding, and people power to be able to do that. And in today's world, much of our spiritual expression takes place online. It's essential that we protect ourselves and each other in these spaces too. Be mindful of what you share and where. Use privacy settings and report abuse when it occurs. Support each other if someone is being harassed or doxxed. Don't leave them to face it alone. If you moderate a pagan group or page, you have clear rules against hate speech, bullying, and misinformation. Cultivate an environment of respect and safety. And finally, do not forget your spiritual toolkit. Paganism is rich with practices that can sustain us in hard times. Ritual, meditation, nature connection, ancestor work, journeying, spellcraft, and more. Use these tools to ground yourself when you feel overwhelmed, to protect your energy when facing hostility, to call in support from your deities, allies, and ancestors, to vision for a better future and work magic towards it. Build your resilience through self-care, community care, and sacred practice. Honor your emotions, but don't let fear root in your heart. As we stand at this crossroads in time, marked by political tension, rising extremism, climate collapse, and social uncertainty, it's easy to feel small. But the truth is, our voices, our stories, and our presence matters more than ever. Pagans are guardians of sacred relationship with the land, the ancestors, the divine, and each other. We walk between worlds, honouring both the old ways and the needs of the present. And in that role, we are uniquely placed to help create a future rooted in justice, harmony, and spiritual freedom. We need to envisage a world where pagan beliefs aren't just tolerated as unusual or fringe, but recognised as valid, vibrant, and essential spiritual paths. We need to envision a world where pagan weddings, funerals, and naming ceremonies are as respected as any other, where pagan chaplains are common in hospitals and prisons, where our children can speak openly about their path at school without fear, where pagan holy days are acknowledged on workplace and academic calendars, and where the media includes pagan voices in coverage of seasonal celebrations and spiritual perspectives. This is achievable, but it won't happen unless we claim our space with confidence, clarity, and unity. And our future must also be inclusive. Historically, some pagan spaces have struggled with accessibility, diversity, and internal bias. This cannot continue if we want to be taken seriously as a spiritual force for change. We must build a movement that centres disabled pagans, pagans of colour, LGBTQIA plus pagans, neurodivergent pagans, and both elder and youth voices. This inclusivity is not just moral, it's magical. The more voices we welcome, the richer our tapestry becomes. And of course, pagans are natural caretakers of the land, the spirit, and the community. We are needed. Our practices of honouring the earth, of living seasonally, of protecting sacred spaces and tending the invisible threads of life are antidotes to the consumerism, disconnection, and harm that plague modern life. Imagine a world where every pagan community has a land-based project, where we're present in climate justice spaces, where pagan healers and energy workers offer care to traumatized communities, and where our altars become sites of political prayer, spells for justice, offerings to protect the vulnerable, workings for peace. Magic and activism are not separate, they feed each other. And we must not shy away from the legal realm, of course. Paganism should be explicitly protected under equality and hate crime legislation. We need clearer guidance for schools and employers. We need resources for teachers, social workers, and legal professionals. We need consistent inclusion in interfaith bodies and government consultations. This means campaigning, petitioning, and sometimes litigating. It means building alliances with other minority faiths. Our ancestors survived persecution and change. They adapted, they hid, and they re-emerged. We honour them not by recreating their world exactly, but by carrying their resilience, their wisdom, and their magic into this one. The future of paganism must be living, responsive, and deeply spiritual. So, what can you do? Well, you don't need to be a leader or a legal expert. Start small. Share your story. Join an organisation. Light a candle for justice. Attend an interfaith event. Mentor a young practitioner. Ask your MP about religious equality. Start a community altar. Write a letter. Say a prayer. Teach a class. Offer a blessing. And when you're ready, step up. There are roles to fill. Voices are needed, and there are fires to tend. Pagans have always walked between worlds. We know how to sit in the shadows and call down the moon. We know how to make meaning from decay and new life from ash. We are the dreamers, the edge dwellers, the ones who remember how to listen deeply to the land, to spirit, and to each other. But this isn't just a time for remembering, this is a time for becoming. The world is changing fast. Voices of fear and division are loud. Systems of oppression are shifting and hardening in new ways. Religious minorities, especially those seen as unconventional or misunderstood, are being scrutinised, scapegoated, and silenced. And yet, there is incredible power in what we hold. We are the keepers of stories that stretch back through time. We walk paths worn by witches, cunning folk, mystics, druids, seers, and shamans. Our practices, though diverse, are rooted in something older than fear. We have connection, reverence, wildness, and truth. So this is not the time to hide. This is the time to rise, and not with aggression or defensiveness, but with clarity, love, and a fierce dedication to our sacred ways, to take up space, to speak clearly, to step out from the margins and into our rightful place as part of the world's spiritual and cultural fabric. So let us not be pulled by panic or tossed by the winds of political chaos. Let us instead be rooted in our values, in our land, and in our lineages. Rooted in our honour for the earth and all her beings. Rooted in love for the community around us, pagan and otherwise. Rooted in wisdom passed through ritual, song, silence, and story. Rooted in responsibility for the future generations who will inherit this path. Like the great oak or the deep well, we are not easily moved when we remember where we come from, and that is our power. Pagans know the importance of joy, of dance, of celebration, of tending the hearth and lifting our voices in song, of knowing the gods and spirits not just in solemnity, but in ecstasy, in laughter, in wildness. So let us also rise radiant, not just surviving in the shadows, but thriving in the light. Creating art, building temples, birthing new traditions, singing in public spaces, planting sacred gardens in defiance of concrete and capitalism. Let our presence be known, gently, proudly, joyfully. And we are many paths and many practices. We are polytheists, we are animists, we are witches, druids, heathens, and more. Some of us are solitary, some work in covens or graves. Some come from long cultural lineages, and others are reweaving ancestral threads from fragments and dreams. But when it comes to rights, recognition, and justice, we must rise together in unity, not uniformity. And together we can amplify each other's voices. We can support each other's events, or we can advocate for policy changes. We can protect each other from harm. We can learn from each other's experiences, and we can offer care when harm is done. And above all else, we can celebrate the beauty of our diversity, because this isn't just about this isn't just about individual belief, it's about collective liberation. And a final blessing for us now. Let us bless ourselves now and each other. May your voice be strong and steady. May your heart be open and protected. May your feet find solid ground, even on shifting soil. And may your path be blessed by the ancestors and the yet to be born. May your magic nourish not only your spirit, but the world around you. May you remember You are not alone. This is the time of the great becoming. This is the time of rising. This is the time of pagan voices singing again, loud, strong, and unafraid. So let us rise, rooted, radiant, and ready. Thank you very much. Comments and questions are welcome.
That was incredible. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Well, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Absolutely love listening to that. Um, Again, like Mike earlier, I know the answer to this, but for the record, if somebody wants to get involved in what the Pagan Federation is doing, how can they do that?
They can drop an email to our volunteer training officer, Chris, on vto@paganfederation.co.uk, or they can get in touch with me, president at paganfederation.co.uk. You can find a lot of our information on our website, which is paganfed.org, and we have social media presences on all the usual channels. So we're available on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube.
Thank you.
Pleasure.